Speak your truth. You may have heard this before. I utter this phrase a lot. And but what is that? Because it's so ambiguous at first. So usually when people become curious and want to move forward with finding their voice, they often ask, like, how do I do this? And so the first thing that I want to say about your voice is, and I understand this not so much because I've read a bunch of books and understand the concepts, but it's been my own practice, and I've come to learn to find my own inner voice and to express it into the world. And so I want to just share with you my experience and how I've done this because I can probably say that I was as bad at it as possible. The way I kind of express that is that I spent a lot of my time way back in my mind, meaning that I was very scared to share my truth with the world. So I stayed hidden and I stayed introverted inside my own mind. And so one of the questions was like, how do I even get started with it? And especially with men. Men because it's like, what do I do? Do I just express every single feeling that I feel? And because that feels like your truth. So let's start with, I guess where I'm experienced, or what I've experienced on my journey so far. And that is, like, what does that powerful truth in you look like? First of all, it's not power. The ego looks for power, in control, using control is what the ego does. The soul is your voice, your truth, and it's wise. And so that means that at any moment, the mind, that you can stand with your shoulders back, you can step in and be present, not needing to demand status in a room, but to be a soul in that room. And in any moment, there's not a lot of thinking, that you know what the right and most powerful thing that you need to say is. And, this happens all through our days. This happens with a lot of different relationships. So for me, how I experience that is that, first of all, I have much more emotional mastery, meaning that my feelings aren't sharp, um, and they don't feel anxious. There's no anxiousness between my feeling, of my feelings. And I'll explain that a little bit from the beginning, the root, seeing that I was kind of probably as messy as a human being, and I wouldn't, um, naive, and so I would say that the biggest thing that happens is if I put these things together, I started out with a very sharp mind, and that's the way that I look at it now. That's kind of so what I mean by that is that that's very reactionary. So I started with a monkey mind. I first started, I didn't even know I really had a monkey mind. I just assumed that my mind was like everybody else's mind. And then I started to try to meditate. And then I learned that no, I couldn't control my thoughts. It seemed like I couldn't have any control over them. And so if you think about what happens with these thoughts that are just blazing around this monkey mind, whenever you are hit with this stimulus, a feeling that comes in, it comes in very sharp. So I kind of look at it like this. If a feeling came up, it's it's this sharpness, and it's like a knife, and um, all of that emotion is wrapped up, and all of these spinning thoughts and very quick thoughts are wrapped into this moment, into this poof, the sharpness. And so where I was coming from when I would react in those moments was more emotion and less wisdom, just because of how my mind was. And so what do you do in the beginning? Do you just share every feeling? Well, to me, it's kind of like you really have to get a good picture of where you're at. Like, do you have the monkey mind? Um, do you like what kind of feelings does comes up? Start doing research, your own research on how your mind works and interacts with your emotions. Start paying attention to that. When something comes up, pay attention to the emotions and then the feelings that are there. And I would say that when you start, your emotion will dictate your thoughts. And then as you become more wise, your thoughts can control your emotions. And there's some fluctuation in that, but there's a lot of truth in that as well. So so how do you start? You start with a baseline, and then you start speaking your truth, and you start finding, where you need to control things. And control in our culture is often looked at, and we bust on the narcissist, the counter-dependent um, part of us, this aspect of us. But this is just a function that happens within all of us. So we have counter-dependent, which is narcissism, or codependent thoughts, and reactions. So in a counter-dependent, meaning narcissism, you think of yourself before you think of others. And in a codependent, you think of others before you think of yourself. So wisdom is when you think of both people at the same time. Isn't that how a soul would operate? Is that there's something higher and a more beautiful and wise way to interact in the world? And so if you imagine when I first started to learn to speak my truth and to find my voice, it was sharp. And remember, this took me years. I just started practicing it, and I had these sharp valleys. And probably paying attention to my thoughts would be my first step. Instead of just expressing every feeling, it's more of um, become a scientist, like your self-scientist that you pay attention to. And what this does is you start to understand this correlation between your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings. And then over time, what ends up happening when you have this awareness, and if you're doing any meditating, and it doesn't even need to be called meditating, because there can be like an esoteric understanding of this. And what I'm talking about now is not all that esoteric, even though you could explain it in esoteric terms, like as within, as without. But it's more of just mastery of the mind and getting your thoughts under control. And over time, what ends up happening is I started to see like a rounding of these. So I would have an incident of anger, let's say, but it would be rounder and it wasn't as sharp and it wasn't as biting. And what that allowed me to do was to observe better what was going on, because when we have these sharp points in events, experiences in our life, that's when the craziness happens. Just a contrasting idea is, these acts of passion. That would, not everybody has those, but oftentimes, people have stories of where they spoke and they regretted the words that came out of their mouth, or they did something that landed them into jail. That's a real contrasty understanding. But those are those sharp periods. And so over time, what ends up happening is those get rounded off, the events start to round off. And for me in my world, I still had anger, I still have sadness, I have less of these emotions, and they last for a lot uh, less time. And that's mostly because it's not a matter that I'm trying to get rid of them or to repress them. It's the fact that all I've had to do was shine light on them and look at the wisdom that they were trying to teach me, and I integrated them. And that's huge what I just said. I integrated those things into my world. And over time, I learned to speak my truth and have my voice. And yeah, and I can't say that I'm perfect now, but I can say that I've come a very long way in the journey, that I feel very confident that I can pass this on to people. So if you have questions again, please feel free to share. It's our experiences that we help. I can share with you concepts, and they're everywhere, but it's our experiences that will help us move to the next level.